Well, hello, everybody. I'm Bill King. I'm one of 10 grandchildren of William Nichols, and I was voted to do this. I received his name. It's his namesake, but I didn't receive his golf talents. I know that after 63 years. Because he won the amateur at 64 years old, so this date am. We're having a great time here. We're making this kind of a family reunion for everybody because our grandfather died in 1972, and we were all young. We were all teenagers and children at the time, but we remembered a lot about him, and so we've got 3 tables here. We got everybody to come and have a kind of a celebration. He had 3 children. Bill Nichols, the oldest, who lived in Muskogee a long time, and he was in the insurance business. Basically, went into the insurance business after my granddad did, and retired in Carmel, California. And he was a lifelong golfer. Carried his golf clubs up into the 70s, playing golf at Carmel Valley Ranch before he passed. The next brother is Lieutenant Colonel John Nichols, and he was John Nichols, but we called him Uncle Jack, and then all his friends called him Nick, so we called him Uncle John Jack Nick. We didn't know exactly what to call him at the time, but interesting story about him is he was 15, so he snuck out of the house when he was 15 years old and learned how to be a pilot. And then ended up, when the war came on, going into the Air Force, learned how to fly B-17 bombers, and he went over in 1942, joined the 8th Army Air Corps, and he flew his captain, the B-17 bomber. He named it the Sooner. So he flew the Sooner in missions all over Europe and over North Africa. Ended up getting shot down, got the Purple Heart. We're really proud of that. But he retired golfer as well, married Nancy. They were golfers, and they retired playing in a beautiful little golf course called Green Valley Country Club. My mother was the youngest, and she went to Baylor. She was a Baylor Bear, and she just passed at 93 this past April, and we were really so happy that she was able to hear that Grandpa got this honor, because it was a real treat, and so she was able to know about that before she passed. Now so as far as Bill Nichols, we've got Brian Nichols and from Colorado, and his wife Nancy's representing the oldest brother. Tom Nichols, Jeannie, and Ellen is representing John Nichols, and my 3 brothers and I, my brother Tom and his wife Patty from Nebraska, my brother David, and his wife Marilyn from Bartlesville, my brother Jim, and his wife Nancy from Bentonville. We all play golf. Matter of fact, David's boys were raised at Hillcrest in Bartlesville, and Jerry Cosby taught them how to play, So anyways, that's we're just having a lot of fun doing this. 5 years ago, when we found out that they were going to have this Hall of Fame, so I talked to my brother. I said, we got to nominate Grandpa. This is neat. We know all this stuff, but we had to do the research, because what's interesting is that, it was so long ago. All we had was bits and pieces and family stories about him. And we had pictures and knew what Mom had said and everything else. But what was remarkable is that as we got to know, we dug into it and we learned more about where he came from. And what's so interesting about it is we still don't all know. And I brought a little prop up here because as we're having our little family reunion here, last night, my cousin Tom comes in from California, and his older brother John's wife had dug in the closet and found some old trophies, and we ended up finding this one. Just came out of nowhere, and we didn't even know this. So Grandpa William Nichols came in second in the Western Amateur, Kansas City, in 1922. So I mean, it's like we're learning more about what he did as we go along. But because there's no, it all happened so long ago. I mean, he was born in 1882. That's 140 years ago. He was Grew up in North Berwick, which was, it's east of Edinburgh on the Firth of Forth. But what we learned is North Berwick was basically the cradle of golf pros. If you look back between 1870 and 1925, all the major golf pros that came over from all the old line golf courses, from Brookline to Balstrawl, Marion, all those famous golf courses, they were all Scottish pros, and they all came from North Berwick. And so Granddad was part of that group. It was a network. And he was young, and he was going to be a lawyer, and it didn't work out, but he caddied. He was a competitor. He started playing competitive golf. He met Fred McLeod. They played together in tournaments over there. Well, it comes around to 1907. He was going to be a lawyer, and then the lawyer that he was apprenticing for died. And back then, you had to have an apprenticeship in order to be a lawyer. You just couldn't get a law school and go to, so he really had nothing to do. Well, Leslie Brownlee had been in Oklahoma City. He laid out, which was Lakeview, which is the predecessor to Oklahoma City Country Club. And he said, well, Muskogee wants to have a country club. Let's call Bill Nichols. So he, whatever they did back then, cabled him over and says, you need to come over. And so my grandfather says, okay, I'm not going to be a lawyer. This sounds great. He says, the way he put it in some stories, he said, I want to go over and teach golf to the Cowboys and Indians. It's Indian territory. We wasn't even thinking about it. So it's really hard to believe what it must have been like back then. He came over. He had $100 to get to Ellis Island. By the time he takes the train down to Muskogee, he only has $30 left. He meets a guy on the train, and they get a room together in Muskogee, and that's how he starts everything. And they say, okay, they want to build a golf course over in Tulsa. So he goes over there on train, and they find a piece of real estate. He lays out 9 holes with the sand greens because they didn't want to mow anything, and they put that together. And it's just hard to believe what it must have been like back then when he did that. I mean, the fact that he was teaching golf in 1908 to people that, you'd have to make the clubs. I mean, they didn't have clubs. They didn't know where to, so somebody said, I want to learn the game of golf. So he would order the heads. You would get the wood, and you'd sand down the wood. You'd wrap the club together, and he made the clubs for all the people that he taught golf for. So it's just a different game. You think of launch monitors today and all the technology and what the golf ball's doing to go 400 yards. And back then, and he's just out there, just play it where it lies. If it goes there, hit it. That's the rules of golf. There's no change. But so it's really interesting what it must have been like. But he knew how to compete. He was a competitor from a childhood on, played in competitive golf. He created tournaments in Scotland before he even came to the United States. So when he came over, he knew everything. He knew the rules of the game, which was required. He knew how to set up golf tournament competition. And he knew how to officiate tournament play. So he had all that. So he took those talents, and with those talents, he decided, okay, we got to have a tournament. So he created the Oklahoma Open with some other buddies, and they financed it. And they had the first Oklahoma Open, which was at the Tulsa Country Club that he just laid out. And the only other player was Leslie Brownlee, who was the guy that brought him. So there's 2 people in the first Oklahoma Open. And in the first 9 holes, he's 8 shots ahead, and Leslie Brownlee quits. He just says, I'm done. I can't beat the Scott guy. He's young. He's accurate. I'm done. So he quits. And so I guess they had a ceremony and said, I win. And then that was all there was to it. But so it's just a remarkable different time back then. He ended up, during those early years, he was a professional, but only for a short period of time, from 1908 to 1920. He went down to Dallas. I'm from Dallas, and he was a pro at Dallas Country Club and Lakewood Country Club just for a couple of years. He thought he was going to go into the war because they'd raised the draft age for World War I up to 40, which is hard to believe, but they needed people to go to the war. And so he thought he was going to have to go and get drafted. So he went back to Muskogee and then ended up wanted to raise a family. He didn't go to war. He got offered a job to make some money in the interest business. There was no way to make money teaching golf, and he wanted to raise a family, so he did that. But he immediately earned his amateur status and went back and went on and never left the game of golf that whole time. He served in all sorts of capacities with the Oklahoma Golf Association, supported it, officiating endless tournaments all around the state. As a golfer, he was an incredibly accurate golfer. He had 13 holes in one in his life. Which another fun fact is that Muskogee Country Club, he must have played it 4 million times, but his eclectic score based the best score of every hole, was a 34. So he basically eagled everything and double eagled whatever else was left. And but he really was an accurate golfer. I don't know how long he was, but back in those days it really didn't matter. But anyway, so we knew him as an older guy. We were young. He had a pipe. He smelled like his pipe tobacco all the time. He was funny, incredibly generous. Everybody loved him. He was kind of like a community hero for years in Muskogee. Just a couple funny stories that we know is that when I was little, we went out and played a little, and I must have been 12 years old or something, and I remember hitting a golf ball, and I topped it, and it rolled down the fairway and rolled up on the green, and I was so proud of myself, and I jumped up and down, and I was happy, and he would look, and he was with his Scottish accent, and because everything was serious with golf, and he says, "I don't care what I went, it was a terrible shot." He made it very clear that I did not hit the golf ball correctly, but that he was a stickler for the game, the etiquette of the game, the rules of the game. He knew them, and he took golf very seriously the whole time. As he got older, he went over to Hawaii with my cousin Tommy's family, and they were stationed in Hawaii, and he went over there. He was in his 80s, and he, of course, walked golf. He never rode. They didn't have golf carts or anything, so they go over and they play golf with my Uncle Jack and Aunt Nancy, and they had the old golf carts with the 3 wheels, just one wheel up front and the loop, that you would turn. You could take some pretty sharp quarters on that deal. So Uncle Jack's driving down the deal, smoking his cigarettes. Grandpa's got his pipe. Nancy's behind him, and Jack tries to turn a left, and all of a sudden, Grandpa rolls out of the cart. Rolls, 80-year-old man rolling down the deal. Nancy's worried about him. He still had his pipe in his mouth, and he gets up and he says, "I'm fine." So, anyway, so the story of him of my grandfather is a story of immigration. If you think about it, he was an immigrant. America is a land of immigrants. It's also an Oklahoma story. He came here and loved the game of golf. Started as a pro, continued to do the amateur work, and ended up establishing what I think the foundation of golf, which is basically leads to what this Hall of Fame stands for. He was quoted in they used to interview him in some of the old newspaper articles, and he was quoted this, and he said this. He said, quote, he says, "I've never been homesick one day since leaving Scotland. I've never been anything but thrilled with my life here in America. I want to live right here in Oklahoma until my Creator calls me." So, America's the land of immigrants. Oklahoma's the land of pioneers. I think we think of our grandfather as being both of those. We're very proud to have him as our grandfather. And even though his contributions were over a century ago, it's special that his life and love for the game is being recognized in such a wonderful way tonight. So, on behalf of my grandfather William Nichols, thanks to the committee, Ken McLeod for shepherding us through this whole thing. Thanks to Bob Dixon, he wrote a nice letter of recommendation. We didn't know if that was kosher or not, but we figured we'd have somebody legitimate say that they knew who he was. Otherwise, nobody knew who William Nichols was, so we did that. So thanks to him and everybody else involved. So thanks. Okay, thank you.